All right, so we're diving deep today into a book that's kind of flipped the script on how we think about getting rich, becoming a millionaire. It's called The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. And it's not your typical, save pennies and wait 50 years kind of advice.
Yeah, this book, it really throws that whole get-rich-slow idea right out the window. DeMarco, he argues that playing that slow game, it's actually a losing game. Because what you're really gambling with is time, your most precious asset. Why wait until you're old and gray to enjoy the fruits of your labor? He makes a really compelling case that you can build serious wealth while you're young and, importantly, still have the energy and freedom to enjoy it.
It's kind of like he's providing this blueprint, this roadmap, this different way of thinking and acting when it comes to your money and your life. And it definitely makes you question a lot of the conventional financial wisdom out there.
Absolutely. And to help you navigate this deep dive, we're going to be going chapter by chapter through the book, breaking down DeMarco's core arguments. He presents these 3 distinct paths to wealth: the sidewalk, the slow lane, and the fast lane. And by the end, you'll have a really good understanding of the differences between them, the mindsets behind them, and the kind of financial destination each one leads to.
Sounds good to me. So where do we start?
Well, let's jump right into chapter 1, The Great Deception. DeMarco, he kicks things off with this really powerful quote: "Normal is not something to aspire to, it's something to get away from." What are your thoughts on that?
I think it immediately forces you to question the whole normal financial advice that we've all been bombarded with, Like maybe playing it safe and following the well-trodden path isn't the best way to achieve real wealth, especially if you want to get there sooner rather than later. It reminds me of how we see those young millionaires on shows like MTV Cribs, and we kind of assume, well, that's just for celebrities. That's not for the average person. But DeMarco wants us to challenge that assumption.
Yeah, I think he's contrasting that image of youthful exuberance and, the kind of wealth that we associate with it, with the often delayed and much less exciting reality of traditional retirement planning. He wants us to question why we accept this long, drawn-out timeline as the only viable path to financial freedom. And then he breaks down that typical get-rich-slow formula, right? Go to school, get a good job, contribute to your 401k, the whole 9 yards. What's his problem with this seemingly responsible approach?
His argument is that, and he's very blunt about it, this get-rich-slow method, it rarely leads to substantial wealth while you're still young enough to really enjoy it. It's like decades of grinding away with no guarantee of a truly rich outcome.
He even calls it
bullshit.
Yeah.
And honestly, it kind of is. If your goal is early financial freedom, it definitely grabs your attention.
It does. And he feels that this conventional thinking, it essentially puts your dreams on hold, sometimes indefinitely. Think about it. You work hard for 40, 50 years, and then maybe, just maybe, you have the financial freedom to pursue your dreams, but by then you might not have the same energy or health. It's what's the point then? And that brings us to the Lamborghini story. He talks about this brief encounter he had with a young guy driving a Lamborghini. What impact did that have on him?
It totally blew up his preconceived notions about wealth and how it was achieved and, importantly, when it could be achieved. Seeing that young guy in that Lamborghini wasn't about envy for him. It sparked this question, this burning question. How is this possible now? And that question, it ignited this whole journey for him to find a different way, a faster way, a fast lane to building wealth while he was still young enough to enjoy it.
And that perfectly sets the stage for chapter 2. Wealth in a wheelchair, get rich slow is get rich old. The title alone really hits you over the head with his critique of the traditional timeline for building wealth. So what did DeMarco do after that Lamborghini encounter?
Well, he became obsessed with figuring out how these young, seemingly ordinary people were achieving wealth early on. He was specifically looking for what he called fameless millionaires. Not the celebrities or athletes whose wealth is so public. He wanted to understand how regular folks were cracking the code.
And what about his own journey after college? Did he immediately find this fast lane?
Definitely not a straight shot to success. He actually talks about his early struggles, trying different business ventures that just didn't pan out, vitamins, jewelry, even those online marketing things that always seem too good to be true. It's a good reminder that finding the right path to wealth, it's not always going to be a straight line. And he actually hit this pretty low point in his 20s, feeling like a failure despite all the research he had done.
But that low point, it kind of became this turning point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He describes it as his merge from slow lane to fast lane.
And it involved a physical move, right?
Yeah. He decided to move to Phoenix. It wasn't just about a change of scenery, though. It was this deliberate move to immerse himself in a new environment, hoping that different opportunities would present themselves. And that's exactly what happened. While he was working in the limo industry, he noticed this problem. People had a hard time finding reliable limo services when they traveled to different cities.
And that simple observation led to his first successful venture. Tell me about that.
It was basically a website that connected limo companies with travelers. He calls it the birth of the money tree.
I like that.
It wasn't some flashy revolutionary idea. It was just a practical solution to a real problem that people were facing. And it's a perfect example of how those everyday problems, the things that bug us, can actually be the seeds of wealth.
And how did that initial business evolve into something bigger?
He talks a lot about the intense focus and work ethic he put into it. But, just as importantly, he really focused on automation and building systems. He created processes so that the business could run more and more without him needing to be directly involved all the time. And that's the key difference, right? It's not just about working harder. It's about working smarter and creating leverage so your income isn't directly tied to how many hours you put in. And that's what allowed him to achieve that multimillionaire status by age 33, which, in the get-rich-slow world is unheard of.
Yeah, it goes against everything we're traditionally taught about building wealth. And this brings us to Chapter 3, The 3 Roads to Wealth, where he introduces that core framework.
He lays out these 3 distinct paths.
Yeah.
The sidewalk, the slow lane, and of course the fast lane. And as we've been touching on, they're not just different speeds, they're entirely different approaches to building wealth, different mindsets, different belief systems.
And each path, it has its own structure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He explains that each roadmap, it's got its own psychology, its own belief system about what's possible financially, and a distinct wealth equation that basically determines your financial trajectory. The big takeaway here is that the path you choose early on, it has a huge impact on where you'll ultimately end up financially.
So let's dive into Part 3. The road most traveled, the sidewalk. Chapter 5 specifically focuses on the sidewalk roadmap. What are the defining characteristics of someone on this path?
Okay, so according to DeMarco, the sidewalk is all about pleasure today, instant gratification, even if it comes at the expense of your future financial security. He quotes Larry Ellison, who said, "It's very difficult to have different beliefs from the majority," which really highlights how much of a paradigm shift the fast lane thinking is compared to the live-for-today mentality of the sidewalk. And people on this path, they're often living paycheck to paycheck, always one unexpected expense away from being broke.
And it's not just about how much they're earning, right?
That's a really important point. He differentiates between what he calls income poor and income rich sidewalkers. Even people with high salaries can be on the sidewalk if they're constantly spending more than they earn. So the fundamental issue isn't necessarily how much you make, it's how you manage your money and your spending habits. It's a lifestyle that's focused on consumption without building any real wealth or financial foundation.
So what's the core problem with the sidewalk?
It's just not sustainable. On the sidewalk, earning more money doesn't solve your money problems because the root cause is poor money management. He illustrates this with this analogy of mortgage payments. He says the anxieties are pretty similar whether you're struggling with a $900 payment or a $9,000 payment if you're living right at the edge of your means. The only way to get off the sidewalk is to change your mindset about money and make a conscious decision to choose a different path.
And he talks about this illusion of wealth that's prevalent on the sidewalk. What's he getting at there?
It's the trap of looking wealthy versus actually being wealthy. Easy credit allows people to buy all those fancy cars and designer clothes and gadgets, but without the actual financial stability to back it up.
Yeah.
It's all surface level and, honestly, often built on a mountain of debt. It's like they're projecting an image of wealth without actually having the substance.
And what are the real costs of living this sidewalk lifestyle?
He argues that this constant pursuit of stuff that you can't really afford, it often comes at the cost of those things that truly make up a rich life. Your freedom, your health, your relationships. He uses this example of a guy who built his dream house but then ended up in financial trouble. It's like the dream house became this burden that impacted his whole well-being. The fast lane, in contrast, it prioritizes freedom first. And that freedom, it actually protects those other important areas of your life. He calls the sidewalk a financial purgatory. You're constantly working to maintain a lifestyle that isn't actually fulfilling or giving you any real security.
Chapter 7 digs deeper into this misuse of money. It's titled, Misuse Money and Money Will Misuse You. He starts off with that well-known saying, money can't buy happiness. What's his take on that?
He kind of flips it on its head and asks, well, does poverty buy happiness?
Yeah.
He's not saying the money equals happiness, but that if you're misusing your money, spending it on fleeting consumer goods, especially if it traps you in debt, it actually prevents you from achieving those things that do contribute to happiness. Freedom, health, and strong relationships. Those core components of a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
But used properly, money can buy freedom, and that freedom can definitely lead to greater happiness.
And he introduces this term lifestyle servitude.
Right.
Can you explain what he means by that?
Lifestyle servitude is when you basically become a slave to your lifestyle. Your expenses and debts have grown so much that you have to keep working just to maintain them. It steals your freedom and prevents you from building true wealth. You become a prisoner to your own spending habits. And he's got this stark warning for those caught in this trap. If you think you can afford it, you can't. He's highlighting that tendency on the sidewalk to overextend ourselves financially, to buy things we can't truly afford.
And this leads into Chapter 8, where he tackles this whole idea of luck. It's titled, Luck is a Process, Not an Event. What's the message here for those stuck on the sidewalk?
He wants to debunk this idea that wealthy people just got lucky, that they won the lottery or something. While luck might play a small role, he emphasizes that lasting wealth is almost always the result of consistent effort, hard work, and being proactive in creating your own opportunities. He argues that simply putting yourself out there increases the likelihood of being in the right place at the right time. It's about increasing your exposure to those serendipitous moments.
And why are people on the sidewalks so drawn to those get-rich-quick schemes?
Because they're always looking for that one big event, that sudden windfall, that lottery win, instead of focusing on the slow, steady process of building real wealth. This makes them vulnerable to scams and schemes that promise unrealistic returns with little effort. He uses this example of a hypothetical magic system that could instantly make you millions. He says, if such a system existed, it wouldn't be a secret, everyone would be using it. It's about understanding that true wealth creation is a marathon, not a sprint.
In Chapter 9, he tackles the disease of I deserve it, which is all about entitlement. How does this play out on the sidewalk?
He uses the story of this guy, Eugene, who works at Walmart and feels like a victim of his low wages. And DeMarco challenges this whole victim mentality. He says, instead of blaming external factors, individuals should focus on increasing their value and creating their own opportunities. He makes this really important distinction between being responsible and being accountable.
Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. Being responsible means thinking before you act, understanding the potential consequences of your choices. Accountability is what comes after. It's about taking ownership of the results, whether good or bad, and learning from your mistakes. And the Fastlane mindset embraces both. Even when bad things happen, like in the story of his friend whose identity was stolen, the focus is on accountability. What can I do differently next time to prevent this from happening again? This proactive approach helps you avoid that victim mentality that can keep people stuck on the sidewalk.
Chapter 10 marks a shift to the seduction of the slow lane. How does he position the slow lane in relation to the sidewalk?
He presents the slow lane as this seemingly more mature and responsible path. It's the get a good job, save your money, invest for the long haul kind of approach that we're all taught. It feels safe, it feels responsible, it feels like the right thing to do.
So what are some of the typical beliefs and perceptions of someone on the slow lane?
They generally avoid debt like the plague. They see their time as something to be traded for dollars in a job. Education is seen as the ticket to a better paying job, and money is viewed as this scarce resource to be carefully hoarded and saved. It's all about security and delayed gratification. But DeMarco argues that this path, it has its own set of limitations when it comes to building wealth rapidly and achieving financial freedom early in life.
Right, because even though it seems more secure, it might not actually get you where you want to go.
Exactly.
Okay, Chapter 11 is titled, Your Job, the Speed Bump Called Monday. He gets pretty blunt here about the inherent limitations of relying solely on a job for wealth creation. What's the core issue?
It all boils down to this. In a job, you are trading your time for money, and there's a limit to how much time you have. Your income is capped by the number of hours you can work and the hourly rate or salary you can negotiate. You have limited control over how much you earn, and your earning potential is ultimately determined by someone else.
And he lays out the slow lane wealth equation here. What's that look like?
It's pretty straightforward. Wealth, Jobs, plus market investments. So investing plays a part. Your job is the primary engine of wealth creation, which, as we've discussed, suffers from what DeMarco calls uncontrollable limited leverage.
Right.
You have very little control over the key factors that determine your income, and there's an inherent limit to how much you can earn based on the time you have available.
And how does he demonstrate the shortcomings of this equation?
He runs through these examples of someone diligently saving and investing over a 40-year career, assuming reasonable growth rates. And the math often shows that even after decades of effort, the wealth you accumulate by retirement might not be as impressive as you'd hoped, especially after factoring in inflation. It's kind of ironic you spend your best years working to maybe potentially become wealthy when you're much older. And that leads to this question. What's the point of accumulating wealth if you don't have the time or the health to truly enjoy it?
Right. And Chapter 12 then critiques education for conformity.
Interesting title.
Yeah, what's his main point there?
He points out the rising costs of higher education and the increasing student debt that people take on, often without any guarantee of a proportional increase in their earning potential. He also introduces this idea he calls the paradox of practice.
What's that about?
It's basically this observation that many financial gurus who advocate for the slow lane, the traditional path of getting a job, saving, and investing, they themselves built their wealth through entrepreneurship, through creating businesses, writing books, giving speeches, activities that align more with the Fastlane principles of leverage and scale.
Oh, I see. So it's like they're preaching one thing but practicing another. Can you give me some examples of this paradox?
He mentions people like Suze Orman, Jim Cramer, Dave Ramsey, Robert Kiyosaki. These are all well-known financial advisors. And while their advice often centers around the slow lane approach, it's arguable that their own wealth comes more from building personal brands and businesses than from strictly following their own advice. He also points out how these gurus often continue promoting those slow lane strategies even when economic downturns expose the vulnerabilities of that path.
And what about those slow lane dangers? He lists a few, right?
Yeah, he outlines 7 key risks. Things like, the risk to your health from job stress, the lack of job security in this constantly changing economy, the fact that your employer essentially controls your time and, in many ways, your life. He talks about this illusion of control that people have over their investments in the stock market. And, the heavy reliance on decades of compound interest to work its magic, which, as we discussed, might not pan out as planned. There's also the vulnerability to economic downturns that can wipe out your savings, and ultimately that slow and often inadequate pace of wealth creation that we keep coming back to. He argues that even those attempts to optimize your slow lane equation, work longer hours, get a better job, get more education, those things, they might help a little bit, but they don't fundamentally change those inherent limitations of the slow lane.
And Chapter 13 wraps up this section on the slow lane with the middle-class mirage. What's the takeaway message here?
He starts by dismissing the lottery as a sidewalk fantasy, pointing out that even those who win often end up broke because they lack the financial understanding to manage their sudden wealth. And he highlights how the term millionaire itself, it's become kind of diluted, right? $1 million today doesn't necessarily mean you're living this lavish lifestyle. Often it's more like middle-class comfort.
I see.
And to drive home that point, he actually lists 12 key distinctions between slow lane millionaires and fast lane millionaires. The differences in how quickly they build wealth, their overall lifestyle, their role as business owners rather than employees, and the greater control they have over their assets.
Yeah, it really underscores the point that the path you choose, it ultimately leads to very different outcomes. Which brings us to part 5 of the book and a major shift in tone. Chapter 16, Wealth's Shortcut, the Fast Lane.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Definitely. So what's the core message of this chapter?
DeMarco presents the fast lane as a legitimate alternative to the sidewalk and the slow lane, a door, #3 he calls it. And it's not about sacrificing everything for decades to maybe possibly achieve financial freedom in your golden years. It offers a quicker route to wealth that doesn't require you to put your life on hold. He quotes Jim Rohn, who said, "People would do better if they knew better." And I think that applies perfectly here. The fast lane is a better way, a faster way that a lot of people just aren't aware of or they just don't understand. He addresses that skepticism around get rich quick, making it very clear that he's not talking about those shady schemes or scams. This is about a fundamentally different strategy, a faster strategy, but a legitimate one.
So can you give me some examples of those seemingly get rich quick fast lanes that he's actually talking about?
He mentions successful authors, inventors, internet marketers. These aren't overnight successes. There's a lot of hard work involved. But what sets them apart is that they're creating value, and leveraging it to reach a large number of people. And that allows them to build wealth more rapidly than the traditional linear progression of a job. It's about creating something once that can generate income repeatedly and at scale.
He uses this great analogy to explain it.
Oh yeah, what was it?
He compares the slow lane to manual labor when it comes to wealth creation. You're trading your time and effort for a limited return, whereas the fast lane is like the industrial revolution of wealth creation. It's about building systems and processes that create leverage and efficiency, and that leads to a new wealth equation, right?
All right, the fast lane wealth equation. Wealth accretes profit plus asset value.
And that shift, that's a game changer. The focus is no longer solely on your job or your investments. It's on building businesses that are profitable and can become valuable assets. And that's where controllable unlimited leverage comes in.
Can you break that down for me? What does that mean?
Controllable unlimited leverage means you have a much greater degree of control over the factors that determine your income and the value of your business. Unlike a job where your boss determines your salary and your earning potential is limited by the number of hours you can work, a fast lane business allows you to scale your reach, increase your profit margins, and build an asset that can be sold for a significant multiple of its earnings. Like that author we talked about, once they write a book, it can be sold to potentially millions of people without requiring much additional effort from the author. That's unlimited leverage.
And he talks about his own experience with this, right?
Yeah, he gives an example of introducing a new service that generated recurring revenue with very little ongoing effort from him.
It's really about building systems that work for you, generating income even when you're not actively working.
Right. Small strategic innovations can lead to massive, scalable income streams.
And then there's the concept of industry multipliers.
Yeah.
How do those play into the fast lane?
Industry multipliers basically refer to how much businesses in certain sectors are typically valued relative to their earnings. So, for example, a software company might have a much higher multiplier than a traditional retail store. This means that by increasing your net profit in a business with a high industry multiplier, you can drastically increase the overall value of that business. And that leads to much greater returns than you typically see with traditional investments in the stock market.
So the value of your business, of the asset you create, that's a key driver of wealth in the fast lane. But how does that translate into actual financial freedom?
Well, those assets, they can be liquidated, they can be sold, and that's where you convert that paper net worth into real money, liquid capital. And then you can use that capital to create passive income streams through investments, real estate, or even other automated businesses. The ultimate goal is to reach a point where your passive income exceeds your living expenses. And that's what he refers to as the money tree. You've built a system that generates more than enough money for you to live comfortably without needing to trade your time for dollars anymore.
Chapter 17 goes into detail about how to grow a money tree. So what exactly is a money tree in this context?
A money tree is essentially a business system you've created that generates passive income. It acts as a surrogate for your time, allowing you to decouple your earnings from the direct exchange of your labor. Unlike a traditional job where the income stops when you stop working, a well-designed money tree keeps generating income even when you're not actively working.
And he makes it clear that not every business qualifies as a true money tree seedling, right?
Exactly. He uses this example of a woman who buys a deli franchise. And while she technically owns a business, she's still very much involved in the day-to-day operations. It's more like business servitude than a true money tree.
Right. She's still trading her time for dollars.
Yeah. And then he goes on to describe 5 different types of businesses that have the potential to become these income-generating money trees. He even gives each type a passivity grade.
So let's go through them. First up, you have rental systems. What are those?
Rental systems involve owning assets that generate income through rent. So things like real estate, storage units, equipment rentals.
Makes sense.
He gives this a passivity grade of A because the more you can minimize your direct involvement, maybe hire a property manager for your real estate, the more passive it becomes.
And then there's computer software systems, which gets an A+ rating. Why are those so passive?
Well, these leverage technology for automation and scalability. Think about websites, software as a service, mobile apps. Once they're created, they can serve a huge number of customers with very little ongoing effort from you. And that leads to high profit margins and makes them really easy to replicate and scale.
Okay, what about content systems? Those get a B grade. What falls into that category?
Content systems are all about creating information products that can be sold again and again. So things like books, online courses, music, stock photography. While there's definitely upfront work involved, these assets can generate income over a long period of time with relatively little maintenance.
Right, because once it's created, it can keep selling without you needing to actively work on it. Okay, what's next?
Distribution systems, which also get a B grade.
And what are those?
These are essentially structures for getting products or services to a large market. So this could involve building a network of affiliates, creating a robust e-commerce platform, or even establishing a franchise system. And often these are combined with one of the other seedling types to create a really powerful system for reaching a lot of people.
Got it. And last but not least, we have human resource systems. These get a C grade, the lowest on the passivity scale. Why is that?
Because these businesses are heavily reliant on employees. And while they can definitely be profitable, managing people comes with higher costs, more complexity, and it requires more of your direct involvement. So they're inherently less passive than those other types.
So the goal, regardless of the type of business, is to create that system, that money tree, that can eventually generate passive income for you so you can achieve that retirement lifestyle at any age.
Exactly. And that brings us to Chapter 18, which focuses on the power of passive income, interest, dividends, and rent. He's basically explaining how to take those assets and turn them into income-generating systems. And he starts off with this really interesting anecdote.
Yeah, the story about Gary, that semi-retired guy riding in his limo, who basically achieved financial freedom through investing in bonds. He was generating passive income by essentially lending out his money.
Right. And that's one of the key ways to generate passive income interest from lending your money through various financial instruments.
And then he talks about dividends, which are those payments you get from owning stock in profitable companies, and rental income, which comes from owning and leasing out assets like real estate. These are all ways to create income without directly trading your time for it.
And he revisits this concept of compound interest here, but with a different perspective, a Fastlane perspective. What's different about how he views compound interest?
In the slow lane, compound interest is often presented as this magical force that will slowly grow your wealth over decades if you just diligently save and invest small amounts consistently. But in the fast lane, the focus is on rapidly building a significant amount of capital first through your business. Once you have that large sum, then compound interest becomes this incredibly powerful tool. It's working on a much larger base, so the growth becomes exponential. He even uses charts to visually demonstrate the difference, the slow, gradual growth of compound interest on small amounts in the slow lane versus the potential for explosive growth in the fast lane once you have a substantial amount of capital to work with.
Chapter 19 introduces what he calls the one law of wealth, affection.
This is a big one.
It really is. So what is the law of affection?
The law of affection basically states that the more lives you affect or breach, in either scale, meaning the number of people, or magnitude, meaning the impact you have on each person, the richer you'll become.
So it's all about creating value for others. And he draws a distinction between this and another popular concept, right?
Yeah, he differentiates it from the law of attraction, which he considers more of a theory. Affection, he argues, is a practical principle based on this real exchange of value. You provide value to others, and they in turn provide you with value in the form of money.
And how do these ideas of scale and magnitude relate back to the Fastlane wealth equation?
Okay, so scale, which is the number of people you reach or the number of units you sell, and magnitude, which is the profit you make on each unit, they directly contribute to the profit part of the equation. The more people you can impact and the more value you can provide to each of them, the higher your profit will be and the faster your wealth will grow.
And he even shows how this law of affection applies to slow laners who have high intrinsic value.
Right.
What's an example of that?
He talks about highly paid professionals like star athletes or in-demand speakers. They can command high fees because they have a huge impact on a lot of people. But they're still essentially trading their time for money, albeit at a very high rate.
So their magnitude of impact is really high.
Exactly.
In Chapter 20, he defines the 4 degrees of wealth. What are those?
He breaks them down as follows. You have net worth, which is simply your assets minus your liabilities. Income, which is the money you earn through active work.
Yep.
Passive income, which is income you generate without needing to actively work for it. And finally, freedom, which is the ultimate goal. It's achieved when your passive income exceeds your total expenses, giving you the freedom to do what you want when you want.
And what's the fast lane's primary focus among those 4 degrees?
The fast lane, it prioritizes building passive income as the most direct path to achieving true freedom. It's not just about accumulating a huge net worth or having a high-paying job. It's about creating those systems that generate income without you needing to trade your time for it.
Makes sense. Chapter 21 offers a quick overview of the business structure Bible. Why is that relevant for a Fastlaner?
Because choosing the right business structure, whether it's a sole proprietorship, an LLC, an S-Corp, or a C-Corp, it has a big impact on your liability protection and your taxes. He briefly touches on some of the key differences, like how a C-Corp can offer some tax advantages through something called income splitting, and it emphasizes control. He makes the point that making informed decisions about your business structure, it's another important choice you have to make as you build your Fastlane.
In Chapter 22, he shifts back to personal responsibility with the driver or the passenger. Your choices engineer your life. What's the key message there?
He really hammers home the idea that your life, especially your financial situation, is a direct result of the choices you make. Big choices, small choices, they all add up. He uses the analogy of a steering wheel. You are the driver of your life. Your choices determine where you go.
Right.
And he shares a story about how a blizzard made him realize that all the problems he was facing in his life were actually consequences of his own decisions.
He talks about different types of choices, right?
Yeah, financial choices, lifestyle choices, relationship choices, and he shows how those seemingly small decisions can have these huge